ovo je jedan od prvite ovakvi istraživački projekti I posebno ima jedna nova dimenzija, kolega Eleonora Serafimovska.
I would like to say that this is one of the first such research projects, and especially there is a new aspect to this. Ms. Eleonora Serafimovska, with the research of the social networks, made a step forward from what is common research practice in this area. I was quite excited when I read through the study, her study. Not only that this is the first of its kind, but it also reflects the dramatic shift of level of communication in contemporary society, irrespective of whether it's a small society like the Macedonian one or a bigger one. Suffers the implications of the global communication. We live in times of globalization due to the expansive and comprehensive communication and transmission of information via new technologies. We have new type of relations being established that 2 decades or 3 decades ago were not expressed in such a manner. So we did not have such communication in the past within the societies and various ethnical groups. Since we are a part of one global intercultural communication, it is quite interesting for us, and it was quite interesting for us, that the idea of multiculturalism in some European countries is debated. Also to talk about reporting on cultural diversity in Macedonia, and from whatever aspect we take a look at this issue, we are talking about cultural, linguistic, minority and other type of diversity. However, in their final version, they will appear as identities that due to the perplexity of the political and economic discourse, they will seem as two parallel words. When we talk about knowledge, professional values and standards of our journalists, of the editors and media in general, we couldn't say that we have a deficit. However, since we have intertwined network between the media and politics, the media discourse often reflects certain political opinions and often reports and transmits information in an unacceptable way. When we talk about recognizing diversity, we talk about recognizing others. We have different kind of reality that is expressed via the political language and through media discourse as a complex symbol system that encompasses social and cultural dimensions and meaning. And yet, in our reality, we again face existence of parallel worlds. We have social groups, ethnical, cultural groups that are quite distant, and the distancing and separation is not hugely dependent on them, but the previously mentioned others. Because of the existence of particular domination of one superior actors over others. The journalists should also be included in the so-called significant others, where they will be required to contribute towards dominating in terms of breaking and overcoming obstacles and barriers, and expanding and strengthening freedom of speech and liberty of thinking. Again, something significant that I want to mention, to which media and journalists contribute greatly, is as follows. Macedonian media scene, maybe due to the conformism of editors and journalists, or maybe due to the aggressiveness of particular self-recognized experts and analysts, has been taken over in a way that seriously is quite worrying. We have a particular category of people that has appeared recently. Famous French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, that in the last years of his fruitful career dealt with media and television, published a book My Encounter with Television. In that particular book, he was especially critical of television and media due to the great power of television, with all available tools to attack people's senses. The number of fast thinkers, the so-called experts, is multiplied here in Macedonia as well. And for a very long time I've asked myself, why is this so? Whether because of the fact that journalists do not have sufficient knowledge, so they could do the research on their own and talk about research journalism. Do we talk about level of conformism of editor-in-chief that usually give the advantage to so-called experts, or we are actually dealing with something other than this? I think that the first two stated points are valid and acceptable. However, the result should worry us. The traditional media, including the very powerful television, lacks and more loses its credibility, validity, and as my colleague will later on talk about the internet media, there is more and more focus on the independent networks, social networks, Facebook and Twitter. Facebook used to be a social network for socializing, and for the past 20 days we have been a witness that the social network Facebook, that in Macedonia has about 700,000 followers, constitutes an autonomous, independent public sphere. Now we're talking about people that have the need and desire to announce something, to transmit something, which most of the time are not even journalists, because not all journalists use social networks in a way that other users use this network. So whether the journalists can recognize the serious threat imposed on traditional media with the appearance of the social networks, since the research that have been carried out in the past 10 years show that there is a dropping line when it comes to trusting media. Until 10 years ago, the trust in traditional media was quite satisfactory, and now in parallel to appearance of social media, now the trust and confidence in public media gradually drops as the confidence in politicians gradually drops. I would always like to emphasize the fact that the two discourses have to be analyzed when talking about traditional and modern media, and have to be analyzed jointly. The second part of my text deals with identity issues, or the European identity issues. In this part I would like to talk about something that not all of you will agree with. The Western Balkan term that is inevitably a part of our media and real-time discourse has two faults. First of all, makes an equation with Europeization and membership to the European Union. And secondly, Western Balkan term has a neo-colonial approach that talks about the Balkan not only an area that has abundance of poverty, remnants of a social system and degradation, but also an area that in which the tactics carrot and the stick practice can be introduced. So, according to Euro-bureaucracy in Brussels, if we've done something good, then the carrot comes along. If the benchmarks are not satisfied, then there is the stick. So the extreme polarity, this extreme situation that arises of this is that the countries from the Western Balkan, in this political and media discourse, these countries are treated as children, and the European Union unfortunately builds a paternal relationship that is not trying to emancipate its children, but creates even greater dependency. I'm quite critical in this particular category and this political discourse. Unfortunately, in Macedonian media, this has not been addressed at all. Unfortunately, we haven't freed ourselves from the dependency mentality. This is quite typical for Macedonia. Maybe it's typical for the rest of the countries in the region, but I would like to talk about Macedonia. We have to have a focal point, a center from which we'll build and strengthen our dependency. So no one has questioned this Western Balkan term. It keeps us frozen in time. We are at the same time Europe, but we're not quite Europe. And it's a question whether we are going to be Europe someday. It is that problematic that in Tetovo, at the University of Southeast Europe, for the past few days, we've had a debate on the future of the Western Balkan in the European Union. Can you imagine that? So we have a university of Southeast Europe in Tetovo. That's a university that still exists, and it's called as such, Southeast Europe, even though, meanwhile, Macedonia with some other countries have sailed towards the infamous Western Balkan region. So in order not to sound frustrated, I would like to read something said by the Slovenian philosopher Debeljak. He talks about the representation of the Western Balkan in the political and media discourse in EU, and he refers to it as a horrible asymmetric in reference to the EU family. So this is a quotation. Maybe at the first time, maybe initially one will not recognize me as an Eastern Slavic individual, a Balkan individual, and my personality is silent about my ethnical minority, yet my uncertain movement on the floor is being discovered. My posture, my body language releases my uncertainty in my... I'm being careful, not because of the social poverty remnants, but also of the bitter experience of not being treated and not being recognized. It's not that I'm not noticed, it's as if I'm invisible. And there is another very evident and very dominant perception that my place is not near the Herald Tribune, in a saloon drinking coffee and being extravagant, but somewhere at the margins of an acceptable public space for which I'm supposed to be grateful, somewhere at the balcony, marginalized, avoiding the embrace of comfort. Slovenia, all Eastern and Central Europe, is not in the vocabulary of recognizable topography of Eastern Europe. Since they have not been even linguistically recognized, they are not hoped to be recognized in civilization. Again, they're being referred to as others, unrecognized. So this is Debeljak's text in 2004, immediately prior to Slovenia's accession to the European Union. So more on European identity and Europeization. Two paradigms could be extracted. One, the countries concerning Southeast Europe. For Bulgaria and Romania, Bulgaria and Romania might be considered as countries that from communist repression found their way in a stage of depression upon acceptation, and upon approximation, because they were not ready yet. There were a lot of social and economic problems that Bulgaria and Romania faced. Macedonia, on the other hand, could be a school example of a so-called pre-accession depression, because even after 5 years of fully met benchmarks and conditions, we have an additional requirement from an identical character. Of course, I have reference from Michel Foucault as well in my text, and his exclusion theory. And I would like to emphasize the absurdity. In order to exclude, you need to be inside. And since we are not inside, because we are a Western Balkan country, that is the answer, who and what we are. We are not European Union. And since we are outside, we're always going to be in a position to accept all requirements that lead to our isolation and preclusion. Of course, the division us and Europe will remain in Macedonian conditions, since our society tries to be more articulate on who has a greater pro-European disposition and identity European agenda. In the two dominant political parties, but also in the two greater ethnical communities. Divisions and separation is even more severe, and that division is even greater because of one particular term, newly established term, that paternally addresses us as children who are unable to think for themselves and create their own future and destiny. And briefly, I wouldn't like to go into greater detail. In 5 points, I'm talking about multiculturalism in the Republic of Macedonia. My position is that the multiculturalism is the future of Southeast Europe. I'm not that ambitious to promote it as a European model or a model for the rest of Europe. But again, there was a debate organized by the School of Journalism stating that in order for the multiculturalism model to succeed in Republic of Macedonia, it is very important to receive positive feedback from our environment. Unfortunately, we have EU member states in which and they're guided by the 19th century principle, and not only that they do not recognize Macedonian minorities, but not any other minority in Greece is recognized. There is certain compromise with the Turkish minority in Bulgaria that is currently being addressed because Turkey at the moment is quite powerful regional subject, and that is in that respect something is being done, but the rest are not being recognized at all. But the paradox of Macedonians in the Southeast Europe is that there is still a problem of their statistical recognition even. If you look at the State Department report, you will see that I've been reading it for 20 years, so 20 years back, there is this number of about 50,000 people, minority, that speak in Slovenian dialect. And it's a question how for 20 years that minority number has not reduced, decreased or increased. It's silly. So it's very important whether finally the European Union, within the general policy in development of democracy, will pressure, as they know to pressure, here in Macedonia as well, to allow for all minorities to be statistically recognized there is to be, for the records to be kept. So I would like to finalize from classical authors. And I'm going to talk about how to emancipate Macedonians, Albanians from the Macedonian global policy or Albanian global policy is when we recognize others and be emphatic not only in recognition of others, but to accept diversity, to accept the significantly different other, even though Macedonian ethnicity or minority in Serbia has the maybe best status in Croatia. The best for multicultural democracy would be that for the cultural, the social, political and overall emancipation of Macedonia in Albania, when we would have witnessing and support in media and political discourse in the Republic of Macedonia for such ethnicities and minorities.
Културната, политичката, социјалната и вкупната општествена емансипација, например, на македонците во Албанија, би имале сведоштва на поддршка во медиумскиот и политичкиот дискурс во Република Македонија. Благодарам.